My husband took his mistress to our beach house. I was there with her husband waiting. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. When I saw his car parked outside the beach house, our beach house, my stomach turned. But I wasn't alone. Her husband was right beside me. Ryan stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the driveway like he'd been rehearsing this moment. We had barely spoken since meeting an hour ago, just enough to agree on what we were about to do. The ocean wind carried the faint crash of waves as we stepped inside. The house smelled of salt and cedar, just as it always had, but tonight the scent made my skin prickle. We moved quietly, slipping into the guest room. The blinds were drawn, the lights off. My heart hammered as Ryan handed me his phone. On the screen were the pictures, Mark with Jessica, arms tangled, her head thrown back in laughter. They were coming here for the weekend. Minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Their voices floated through the open windows, low and playful. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palm. Ryan leaned against the wall, calm in a way that made me wonder how many times he'd imagined that. The front door opened. Footsteps crossed the living room. Laughter again, hers this time, high and breathless. They talked about the view, about the privacy they'd have. Each word was a needle. Ryan gave me a small nod. I walked into the hallway, flipped the breaker. The house dropped into black silence. Jessica gasped. Mark swore. Then, from the hidden speaker Ryan had set up earlier, came the sound of their own voices, recorded phone calls, text message reads, every smug word they'd said about us. Mark shouted my name, stumbling toward the sound. I didn't answer. Ryan stood in the kitchen doorway, blocking the path. His voice was low even. I knew months ago. I just needed you, Laura, to help me finish this. In the dim glow from outside, I saw Mark's confusion twist into fear. Ryan continued, we've already drained the joint account. The contracts you signed give us controlling interest in the business. You're done. Jessica's voice shook as she asked what was happening. I didn't look at her. I picked up my bag from the counter. You'll figure it out, I said, walking past them. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. Ryan followed, tossing both their phones into the dark stretch of sand. The engine of his truck rumbled to life. We pulled away, the beach house shrinking in the rearview mirror, lights still dead inside. Neither of us spoke until we reached the highway. Ryan's jaw was set, but there was the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. I faced forward, the sound of the waves fading behind us, knowing they were trapped there, with nothing left but each other. I poured 2 glasses of wine, handed one to Tom, and hit play on the live feed from the bedroom upstairs. The screen lit up, showing Jack and Rachel in our bed like they owned the place. Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. An hour earlier, a friend had called me while I was at the grocery store. She'd spotted Jack driving toward our beach house, and he wasn't alone. My heart pounded, but not from shock. I'd known something was wrong for months. Rachel's name had been showing up in his texts too often, her laugh too loud when she was around him. Tom had found out the same way, whispers from co-workers who'd seen them together after hours. We didn't plan a confrontation in the heat of the moment. We planned to watch. To let them bury themselves in their own choices. The security system at the beach house was my idea from the start. Jack thought it was for safety. He never asked how many cameras there were or where they were placed. We sat on the couch, wine glasses in hand, as the two of them laughed and kissed on the screen. Tom's breathing grew heavier. Let's give them time, he said quietly. His eyes stayed locked on the image, cold and calculated. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Then, Jack pulled Rachel toward the safe in the corner of the room. I didn't even flinch. I already knew what was inside. Nothing but a thick envelope I'd put there myself. He knelt, entered the code, and swung the door open. I could almost hear his voice through the screen when he froze. Rachel leaned in, reading the bold black letters on the envelope. For Jack and Rachel. She pulled it out, unsealed it, and found the divorce papers with my signature and date already filled in. Tom took a slow sip of wine, his lips curling just slightly. You knew, he said, not as a question but as a fact. I knew, I answered. I'd drained the account tied to that safe 2 weeks ago, moved the money to one Jack had no access to. He thought this trip was going to be his getaway, his little escape. Rachel dropped the papers back into the safe, her hands shaking. Jack slammed it shut, but it didn't matter. The moment was burned into the feed, and saved to a hard drive Tom had brought with him. We set our glasses down. No rush. No raised voices. We walked upstairs together, each holding a fresh copy of those divorce papers. Jack's head snapped toward me when we stepped inside. Rachel scrambled off the bed. Neither of them spoke. I didn't bother with questions. I placed the papers on the dresser beside him. Tom did the same with his set for Rachel. Then we walked out, our steps steady, leaving them to sit in the silence they had made for themselves. Fireworks lit up the sky, but the real explosion was waiting inside the beach house. Eric unlocked the door with a quiet snap of the lockpick. The place was exactly as I remembered: white walls, seashell decor, the faint smell of sunscreen and salt air. We moved quickly, not talking much. I set the champagne on the counter while he carried a box of sparklers into the living room. A week earlier, my neighbor had told me she'd seen Kyle here with another woman. I didn't want to believe it until I saw the photos she sent. The woman was Amanda, Eric's wife. That was how we ended up here together, planning something neither of them would forget. Eric handed me a lighter. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Let's make it a night to remember." We placed the sparklers in vases around the living room, their metal stems sticking up like little invitations. I plugged in my laptop to the big TV on the wall, loading the slideshow I'd spent the last 2 days putting together. Every picture I had of Kyle and Amanda, taken from the neighbor's phone, and my own digging through Kyle's messages. Outside, the crack and whistle of fireworks echoed over the water. It was the perfect cover. Not long after, headlights swept across the windows. I heard laughter, then keys jingling at the front door. They stepped inside, Amanda holding a beach bag, Kyle grinning like he owned the place. "Surprise," I said from the couch. Kyle froze. Amanda blinked at me, then at Eric, who stood by the kitchen island with his badge clipped to his belt. Before they could speak, the TV lit up with the first photo, Kyle and Amanda holding hands in the parking lot of a seafood place. The next image was them sitting close at a bar, then kissing on the porch of this very house. Photo after photo scrolled by, the sound of fireworks outside syncing with each click of the slideshow. Amanda's face drained of color. Kyle muttered my name, but I didn't move. Eric leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching them squirm. When the last photo faded, Eric's voice cut through the silence. "You two don't live here, and the locks have been changed." Kyle's head snapped toward me. "You can't." "Yes, I can," I said, holding up the new keys. Eric stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Trespassing on private property. You're under arrest." They didn't fight. The sound of fireworks still rattled the windows as Eric read them their rights. I grabbed my bag and followed him out, leaving the champagne unopened. By the end of the week, the beach house was sold. Eric and I split the money, and he filed for divorce the next morning. The 4th of July had always been loud, but that year, the quiet afterward was the best part. The first letter I found was enough to ruin me. By the 10th, I wanted revenge. They were hidden in the bottom drawer of Daniel's desk, tied with a ribbon like they were something precious. His handwriting filled each page, long paragraphs about how she made him feel alive, how he dreamed of a life with her. Her name was Hannah. I knew she was married to Matthew. I'd met him at a neighborhood cookout a year ago. At the time, I didn't know she'd already been seeing Daniel for months. When I called Matthew, he didn't sound shocked. His voice was calm, measured. "I've known for a while," he said. "I just didn't have the right moment to deal with it." We made a plan to meet at my family's beach house in Maine, the one Daniel thought of as his private escape. The house sat on a quiet stretch of coast, no neighbors for half a month. Perfect for what we needed. Matthew arrived with a toolbox, and we spent hours printing every letter, making copies until the stack was thick enough to spill over the kitchen table. Then we started pinning them to the walls. Living room, kitchen, bedrooms, even the bathroom mirror. By the time we were done, the house looked like a gallery of betrayal. That night, we left the lights on and the doors unlocked. When Daniel's car finally pulled into the driveway, I could hear their voices carrying up the path. Hannah was laughing. They stepped inside, and I watched from the corner of the room as Daniel froze. His eyes moved from one page to the next, reading his own words, over and over. Hannah's smile slipped away as she saw her name on every sheet. "What is this?" Daniel asked, but his voice was flat, like he already knew the answer. Matthew stepped forward. 2 years' worth of proof, he said. "Enough for both of us to take everything you've got." Hannah turned to him. "You can't." "Oh, I can," Matthew cut in. "I've been building this case for months. And Sarah's getting half of everything you thought you were hiding." Daniel looked at me, his face pale. "Sarah." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The walls spoke for me. Matthew handed me a folder, copies of financial statements, messages, and even photos I hadn't seen before. "We're done here," he said, glancing at them both. No one yelled. No one begged. The only sounds were the waves outside and the faint rustle of paper when Hannah brushed against the wall. We walked out together, leaving the lights on behind us. The house, once warm and private, now felt like a crime scene. By the time we reached the road, I knew they'd never recover from the shame. In our small town, stories like this didn't fade, they spread. He bought her a ring. I found it, and I decided she'd get it, just not the way he planned. It was hidden in the back of Brad's closet, tucked inside a small velvet box. The diamond caught the light when I opened it, and my chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the sharp, clean edge of anger. The receipt was still in the bag. He'd paid in cash. Melissa's name had come up before, just enough for me to notice. I knew she was married to Aaron, a quiet accountant who always kept to himself. I tracked down his number and told him what I'd found. Aaron listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Meet me at the beach house tomorrow night." His voice was calm, almost too calm. We drove down to the Outer Banks together, the long stretch of sand lit only by the moon. The house was empty when we arrived, the air still carrying the smell of salt and weathered wood. We kept the lights off, sitting by the sliding glass doors that looked out over the dune. Aaron poured 2 drinks. "Let's just wait," he said. It didn't take long. Headlights appeared on the road, then the crunch of tires on gravel. Brad's laugh drifted in first, followed by Melissa's softer voice. Through the gap in the blinds, I saw them walking hand in hand toward the deck. We stayed where we were as they stepped inside. Brad set down a small bag, probably holding the ring, and led her toward the back porch. His voice was low but clear enough. "I have something for you." Melissa smiled as he reached into his pocket. She gasped when he opened the box, the diamond catching the porch light. That was my cue. I slid the door open and walked toward them. Brad's head snapped up, his face draining of color. "Jenna." I didn't let him finish. I took the box from his hand, stepped past them to the railing, and tossed the ring into the black water below. The splash was soft, almost gentle, but the silence that followed was heavy. Melissa stared at me, then at Brad. "What is this?" Aaron stepped out onto the porch, hands in his pockets. "It's the part where you both realize you've been played," he said. Brad turned on him. "What are you?" Aaron's smile was small, controlled. "Jenna and I have been seeing each other for months. Guess we both needed a little payback." Melissa's mouth fell open. Brad's shoulders slumped like the weight had finally hit him. Neither of them spoke after that. Aaron and I walked back inside without looking over our shoulders. We left them standing on the porch, the waves crashing somewhere in the dark. By the time we reached the sand, we were laughing, low and steady, while the night carried the sound out to sea. A hurricane was coming, but the real storm was already in the living room. Mike hammered the last board across the window while I stacked sandbags near the door. The air outside was heavy, the kind that pressed against your skin, warning you something bad was on the way. Inside, the only sound was the clink of a bourbon bottle against glass as Mike poured 2 drinks. 2 days earlier, I'd learned Greg wasn't working late at all. He'd been spending his nights with Tiffany, a younger woman from his office. I didn't know much about her until I found out she was married to Mike, a Coast Guard officer. When I told him, his face didn't change much. He just asked where and when. We met at my beach house before the storm warnings became official. The streets were already quiet, most people gone inland. The idea was simple: wait for them to come here and let the storm trap them inside with them. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose boards on the porch. We sat in the dim light of the living room, bourbon in hand, saying very little. Headlights appeared through the slits in the boarded window. The sound of tires crunching over gravel cut through the wind. A moment later, the front door opened, and there they were, Greg dripping wet from the rain, Tiffany clutching her coat. "What the hell?" Greg started, but his words stopped when he saw us sitting there. Mike didn't move from his chair. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "Looks like you're stuck here." Tiffany's eyes darted around the room, like she was searching for a way out. Greg took a step forward, but I stood up, blocking his path. "Sit down," I told him. The wind howled outside, rain hitting the boards in sharp bursts. We stayed in silence for a long stretch, the air thick with the smell of wet clothes and bourbon. Then Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Promotion," he said, tucking the phone back into his pocket. "Turns out your little affair got her removed from her post. Chain of command takes that seriously." Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Greg looked between us, confused, until I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers. I dropped them on the coffee table. "Sign them tonight," I said, "or I'll make sure every client and friend you have knows exactly why we're here." Thunder rolled so loud it shook the floor. Greg stared at the papers, his jaw tight. Tiffany sat back in her chair, eyes fixed on the wall. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked to the kitchen for another drink, the storm outside matching the one I'd been holding back for far too long. I called her husband to the beach house for a card game. We were playing for more than money. Chris showed up with a deck of cards, a bottle of whiskey, and the kind of grin that said he already knew the rules. We didn't waste time talking about what Ryan and Brooke had done. We both knew. Instead, we cleared the coffee table and dealt the first hand. The night air came through the open windows, carrying the faint smell of the ocean. Chips clinked, cards slid across the table, and the quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was focused. Every hand, every bet, was for something Ryan or Brooke owned, things they didn't know they were losing. Chris bet his vintage watch against Ryan's surfboard. I put up a designer bag Ryan bought me years ago in exchange for Brooke's diamond ear. The pile of winnings grew in the corner, a strange collection of possessions tied to people who had no idea they were being traded away. Outside, headlights swept across the driveway. Chris smirked but didn't look up from his cards. "One more hand," he said, dealing fast. The front door opened. Laughter drifted in before they appeared. Ryan with his arm around Brooke, both of them still glowing from whatever they'd been doing. They froze when they saw us at the table. Ryan's smile dropped. "Chelsea, what is this?" "Game night," I said, sliding my chips forward. "You're just in time for the last hand." Chris kept his eyes on the cards. The bet for this round was big. Ryan's fishing boat, the one he bragged about every week. Chris had been circling it all night. We played the hand in silence, the tension stretching so tight you could hear the shuffle of every card. When Chris laid down his winning hand, he didn't cheer. He just leaned back and tapped the table. "Boat's mine." Ryan stepped forward. "You can't bet my." I cut in, because you signed it over to me years ago, and I just put it on the table." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Boat's still mine then." I smiled. "Actually, no. I sold it this morning. Cash. Thought you'd like to know before you started celebrating." Ryan's face went red. Brooke looked at Chris like she didn't recognize him. Neither of them spoke as Chris and I started packing up our winning. We didn't rush. Every chip went back into its case, every item stacked neatly by the door. Ryan and Brooke stood there, still trying to figure out how the night had turned so fast. When we walked out, the air felt cooler, cleaner. Chris handed me a cut of the winnings, and we left them standing in the living room, with nothing left but each other, and no way to pay for the gas to leave. I went live on Instagram, and 3,000 people watched my husband walk into the trap. Sean sat at the kitchen counter with his laptop, his fingers moving fast across the keys. Small screens showed every room in the beach house, each one feeding into the live stream. Tiny red lights glowed from the cameras we'd hidden earlier. It had taken less than a week to set up. I'd found the messages between Jake and Courtney late one night, plans to meet here, talk about their future. I didn't know much about Courtney beyond her polished Instagram feed, but Sean knew plenty. She was his wife. When I told him, he didn't shout or curse. He just leaned back and said, "Let's make sure the whole world sees what they're really like." We placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, and upstairs bedroom, each one angled perfectly. Sean connected the feeds to my Instagram account and Courtney's at the same time. "Once they're here, it'll take care of itself," he said. By the time headlights rolled into the driveway, thousands of people were already waiting on the stream. The comments were flying too fast to read. Jake came through the door first, carrying a bottle of wine. Courtney followed, brushing her hair over one shoulder like she knew she was being watched. Only she didn't know how many were watching. They laughed and talked as they moved through the living room, the microphones picking up every word. The comments went wild. People tagged friends, posted laughing emojis, and dropped question marks. Upstairs, Jake tossed his jacket on the bed. Courtney set the wine on the nightstand, then leaned in close to him. The stream zoomed in automatically, thanks to Sean's programming. The number of viewers jumped to over 5,000. Courtney's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then froze. Her screen showed the live feed, her own face staring back at her, with thousands of comments scrolling underneath. Jake turned toward her. "What is?" Before he could finish, Sean's voice came through the speakers in the living room. "Smile for your audience." They both whipped around, realizing they weren't alone. Sean and I stepped into view, the glow of the monitors lighting the room behind us. The chat exploded. People were tagging Courtney's sponsors, dropping Jake's employer's name, and screen recording every second. Courtney's hands shook as she grabbed her bag. Jake muttered something under his breath, but no one cared. The stream ended only after they were gone, slamming the door behind them. The next morning, Sean sent me a screenshot. Courtney had been dropped by 3 major sponsors overnight. Jake's boss had sent an email terminating his contract. That evening, we opened champagne at the kitchen counter. The comments on my last post were still rolling in, thousands of strangers telling me we'd played it perfectly. He thought he was taking her to our anniversary spot. He didn't know I'd be waiting, with her husband. Rob arrived early, carrying a box of candles and a bottle of wine. We worked in silence at first, each of us remembering our own reasons for being there. I set the table with the same dishes Peter had used on our anniversary years ago, the night he told me he wanted forever. Rob strung lights along the deck rail, matching the ones Peter had hung back then. We didn't need to talk about how we knew. I'd seen the glances between Peter and Lisa, the way their conversations stopped when I walked into a room. Rob had his own list of signs: late nights, whispered phone calls, unexplained trips. By the time we finished, the house looked like a perfect replica of that night. Roses on the table, wine glasses ready, music low in the background. The only difference was the people waiting inside. The sound of a car pulling up broke the quiet. Through the window, I saw Peter step out, holding a bouquet of roses. Lisa followed, smiling like she'd been promised something special. They climbed the steps to the deck, Peter leading her toward the door. When he opened it, the smile on his face froze. His eyes went straight to me, sitting at the table sipping wine, then to Rob standing beside me. Lisa stopped short, the color draining from her face. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. I set my glass down. "It's our anniversary dinner. At least it used to be." Peter's hand tightened on the flowers. "Vanessa, I already moved your things into a storage unit," I said, cutting him off. "And I sold your car yesterday. Thought you should know before you start wondering where it is." Rob stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You won't be coming back here either. Locks are changed." Lisa's eyes darted between us, looking for some way out of the moment. Peter opened his mouth to speak, but didn't seem to find the right words. The music kept playing, soft and steady, while the four of us stood there. The only other sound was the waves rolling in beyond the deck. I pushed my chair back and stood. "You should go now," I said. Peter glanced at Lisa, then at Rob, but there was nowhere for him to turn. Finally, he stepped past me, still holding the roses. Lisa followed, her shoulders tight. They walked down to the driveway, climbed into Lisa's car, and drove off without looking back. Rob locked the door behind them. The tension in the room eased, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing they couldn't undo what we'd just done. He said he was in Chicago, but his GPS showed him at our beach house, and I wasn't the only one tracking him. When I called Ben, he didn't sound surprised. He'd been keeping an eye on Andrea's phone too, and her location matched Michael's. We drove down together, neither of us saying much, both replaying in our heads the excuses we'd been fed. The beach house sat quiet when we arrived. We parked a few streets away and walked the rest, letting ourselves in with my key. The air smelled faintly of the ocean and old cedar, just like it always had. We went upstairs and slipped into the closet of the master bedroom, careful not to make a sound. Ben set up his GoPro on a shelf, the little red light blinking in the dark. We could hear every creak of the floorboards, every muffled sound from the deck outside. My heart was pounding so hard I worried they'd hear it. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Laughter floated up the stairs, followed by the pop of a champagne cork. Michael's voice came first. "To a weekend with no distractions." Andrea's laugh followed. Finally, they came into the bedroom, clinking glasses. I could see them through the slats of the closet door. Michael tossing his jacket on the chair, Andrea kicking off her shoes. They looked comfortable, like they'd been here before. Ben didn't move. He just let the camera roll. I stayed still, gripping the doorframe so tightly my fingers hurt. Michael leaned in to kiss her, and that was when Ben stepped out. The sudden movement made Andrea gasp and stumble back. Michael froze, the champagne glass still in his hand. "Smile," Ben said, holding up the GoPro. "You're on camera." Michael's face drained of color. "What the hell?" I walked out behind Ben, my eyes fixed on Michael. "Chicago, huh?" Andrea's mouth opened, then closed again. She turned toward the door, but Ben blocked her. "Oh no, you're staying right here. Wouldn't want to miss your big debut." Michael started to speak, but Ben cut him off. "This footage is going to play at the fire department's charity dinner next week. I'm sure the crowd will love it." Andrea looked like she might cry. Michael just stared at the floor. We didn't yell. We didn't need to. The silence in the room did more damage than anything we could have said. When it was over, Ben and I left them standing there, champagne bottles still uncorked, the weekend they'd planned in ruin. 2 weeks later, I sold the beach house. The money went straight into my new business account. Michael got nothing, except the memory of that night and the knowledge that everyone had seen it.